listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, US President Donald Trump's tariff bombshell. The US leader today appearing to move the goalposts yet again and flagging the baseline of 10% may change.
I would say it'll be somewhere in the 15 to 20% range.
So maybe 15 or 20 or?
No, I said, I sort of know. I just want to be nice. I would say in the range of 15 to 20%.
So what does this mean for Australian exporters and our overall economy? We'll unpack all the latest details in just a moment. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Tuesday, the 29th of July. Authorities in the US have identified the gunman responsible for a mass shooting in a New York high-rise. At least 5 people were killed, including an off-duty police officer, after the gunman walked into the Manhattan building earlier today, our time, and opened fire. The gunman has been identified as 27-year-old Shane Tamura from Las Vegas, who died by suicide at the scene. The shooting occurred in a building that houses major firms including Blackstone, KPMG, JP Morgan and the NFL's headquarters. Police are yet to work out a motive at this stage, but say the shooter had suffered a history of mental health issues and had arrived in New York just hours before the deadly attack.
The initial investigation shows that Mr. Tamura's vehicle traveled cross-country through Colorado on July 26th, then Nebraska and Iowa on July 27th, and then in Columbia, New Jersey as recently as 4:24 p.m. today. The vehicle entered New York City shortly thereafter.
More than 40 jobs will go, with the Commonwealth Bank continuing its shift towards AI technology. The bank, which posted a profit of more than $5 billion earlier this year, says 45 call centre roles have been affected in the latest round of cuts. CBA says it's investing heavily in artificial intelligence, including a chatbot powered by ChatGPT technology to handle what it calls simple customer inquiries. It comes after the bank announced 164 jobs had been cut from its tech division in March. And renowned jeweller Sir Michael Hill has passed away at the age of 86. The founder of the multi-million-dollar chain, Michael Hill Jewellers, is survived by his wife, Lady Christine, their 2 children and grandchildren. Now it's time to get into our deep dive on the latest twist in the US tariff war. Our Trade Minister Don Farrell says Australia is assuming a 10% tariff, saying the Trump administration had not notified our government of any changes. That's despite today's surprise announcement from the US president in Scotland that countries who had not negotiated special deals may face tariffs of between 15 to 20% on their exports. So will the US president follow through, and should Australia be concerned? We unpack all of today's developments with international trade expert Dr. Scott French. Scott, thanks so much for joining us. Let's start at the beginning. Explain to us, what is a tariff and how does it work?
So a tariff is just a tax on an imported good, right? So just like in Australia, we pay the GST. Now that's a value-added tax, so it's included in the price. A tariff's a little bit similar. It's just that instead of paying across all the goods you purchase, an importer pays that tax on a good that's brought into the country. Tariffs are used for a variety of reasons. They used to be important for raising tax revenue in sort of the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, just because it was easy. It was an easy place to collect a tax because you could watch goods coming across the border and tax them there. In modern economies, we tend to rely on income taxes, value-added taxes. So they're much more used for sort of specialized policy purposes, mainly in an attempt to protect domestic industries from foreign competition.
Well, President Trump over recent weeks and months, one may argue, has thrown that whole analogy on its head, putting in these trade threats, this trade war with many countries around the world, including Australia. And there was another twist today where President Trump seemed to drop another tariff bombshell and said, basically, we are going to be setting a tariff for essentially the rest of the world. I'm quoting President Trump here. And that's what they're going to pay if you want to do business in the United States. He was asked about that and what the rate would be. And President Trump replied, I would say in the range of 15 to 20%. What's going on here?
Well, I mean, if you've been paying attention since the beginning, it's hard to know what the policy is going to be from 1 minute to the next. So if you remember the Liberation Day tariffs, we got a bunch of rates for every country in the world, including a few penguins. And then very quickly after that, we had a pause. Then we got promised 90 deals in 90 days. I don't know what the count is now, but we've had a handful of deals. These are handshake deals, frameworks of deals. So throughout all of this, it's never been completely clear what the long-term policy was going to be in terms of actual tariffs on actual countries and actual goods. What this does seem to indicate to me is that they've put their efforts into getting these sorts of deals that we've seen with the UK, with the EU, with Japan, on some of the largest U.S. trade partners. Now, interestingly, we don't get Canada and Mexico, which are two huge trade partners of the U.S., but perhaps there's a bit of deal fatigue that rather than going country by country and ironing out all of these details, they're thinking of establishing some baseline tariff, which on the Liberation Day tariffs, the minimum was 10%. Maybe it seems like they're thinking of setting sort of a baseline of 15 to 20% across countries. But again, Trump just said this in the process of questioning, is my understanding, and whether that will change tomorrow or whether we'll get more detail is yet to be seen.
So, Scott, in regards to where this leaves Australia right now, we've been told by our Trade Minister, who was announced this afternoon, that they're not exactly sure what's happening with the tariffs for Australia right now. It's basically a wait and see or a wait and watch approach. What does this mean for Australian business who do export into the US? It's a big concern because you don't know what the playing field is right now.
Yeah. So right now, nothing's changed, right? So we're still sitting with that 10% tariff. So until something official is announced, then there is no change. But obviously, we have seen an indication that a change may be coming. So yes, if you're an exporter to the US, you would be worried. Now, in terms of the broader Australian economy, we don't rely that much on the US as an export market. So even, sort of the aluminium industry, which was worried about these tariffs, it's only about 10% of our exports going to the US. Now, some pharmaceuticals, I think they may be worried if the U.S. pharmaceutical industry is putting pressure on the Trump administration to use these tariffs to get concessions on sort of the prices Australians pay for U.S. medicines or medicines where these U.S. pharmaceutical companies have patents. That may be worrying for those producers here. But I think even at a 15, 20% tariff, it's not ideal. But if that's the baseline tariff worldwide, then we're still, so producers here are still on sort of similar footing to producers in other countries. So it's not the kind of thing that's going to wreck the Australian economy overnight. Obviously, it is a concern, and as a trade economist, I'm firmly of the position that lower trade barriers are almost always better for the economy as a whole and most participants in it. But we're still talking about the cost at the margin, right? So affecting some producers and some workers in some industries, but not something that's going to be a massive shock to the Australian economy, right? I think the bigger picture is what all of this sort of global Trump trade war and especially the relationship with China is going to have on the Chinese economy and the economies of our trading partners in the region. And so if we start seeing the countries that are the big destinations for Australian iron ore, coal, natural gas, right, that's where you'll see bigger worries for the broader economy.
So, Scott, in regards to also stepping back and looking at how this plays out for our relationship, it seems right now that we weren't consulted about this possible change in the tariffs. It seems that we can't get, for the Prime Minister's point of view, a face-to-face meeting with President Trump. And second of all, we've just seen the ban lifted on US beef. Is it America first and everyone else second?
Well, that's certainly the way Trump sees it, right? I mean, there's no arguing that. I mean, he literally ran on the platform of America first. And in every foreign policy area, they're going to the UN and talking about their America first policy. So I think in Australia, we have to get used to the fact that Trump just doesn't seem to place much value on this relationship. And I don't know that, anything that we say is going to change that, right? So Trump thinks in a very transactional, very bilateral way. And so we have to bring something to the table and say, look, if you give us this, we can give you that. And until we do that, I don't think you're going to get much of his attention. So, and maybe it's that he's taking Australia for granted, and maybe we want to, be a bit more of a squeaky wheel and say, look, we're over here. We followed the United States into, every major conflict since World War II. We have these highly integrated militaries. We've got this strategic relationship that we've been in lockstep through parties of both sides in both countries for decades. And maybe that's something you don't want to lose. But at the same time, sometimes it's better just to not get Trump's attention. And so there's a tightrope there.
Scott, in regards to how these tariffs are going to play out for America and the rest of the world, you mentioned before that we also as Australia need to be concerned about how these tariffs may affect the economy in China and the rest of the world, and also the American economy, because there is a growing school of thought that the tariffs in America that increase the cost of goods in America are going to hurt the hardworking Americans the most.
Yeah, and I think that that's certainly going to be the case. And we see that, so we started at the beginning saying, what's a tariff? A tariff is a tax. It's a very regressive form of tax in the sense that the lower income workers pay, what they spend their money on is disproportionately the kinds of things that get imported or have imported parts or components, right? So you've seen at the same time, Trump's extended his tax cuts, which largely go to the highest income, wealthiest individuals in the country. And he's raised tariffs, which is a tax increase disproportionately on the poor. So it's going to hurt the lower income Americans, both in the prices they pay for goods and, if they're working in agriculture or these other major U.S. exporting sectors, the auto industry, they're going to maybe see job losses there. So these tariffs are protecting certain industries like the steel and aluminum. I think, in a sense, Trump's trying to protect the auto industry by having 25% tariffs on autos, but he's also put tariffs on components, right? And the steel and aluminum, which are the inputs into the U.S. auto sector, which is highly integrated through North America. But overall, the global economy, the global economic pie is bigger when we just have fewer overall trade barriers. So that's going to diminish the size of the global economy. But because of the way the details of the policies are implemented, the way supply chains are structured, there will be some winners and losers. Australia's sitting down here where I think, the things we buy from the US, so airplanes, some medical equipment, probably that stuff's going to get more expensive. Maybe some of the things we buy from South Korea that's still facing pretty high tariffs. So some of our appliances, some of our cars, maybe those get a bit cheaper. So that's good for us. Maybe the Chinese economy is going to slow down a bit more. That's bad for the mining sector. There's lots of moving parts going up and down, but I think the overall picture is it's not good for the average American consumer. It's certainly not good for the countries that are selling goods into the U.S. And as Australia, I think we're not a big exporter to the U.S. We're a moderate importer from the U.S. And so we're more just watching these effects churn through the tides, and we're getting pushed in a few different directions.
We are watching the roller coaster ride continue. Scott, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That was international trade expert Dr. Scott French. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. And we'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.